Throughout this series, we've talked about cardinal-electors constantly, the men who actually cast the votes that choose a new pope. But we've never stopped to properly explain who these men actually are, how they got that title in the first place, why there's a hard cutoff at age 80, and why the geography of who's eligible has changed dramatically over the past several decades. It turns out the story of who gets to vote is almost as interesting as the vote itself. Let's get into it. Welcome to Pope Pulse. This is part 8 in our conclave series. If you're new here, the earlier videos cover the death to conclave process, the ballot mechanics, eligibility to become pope, and papal names, but this one stands on its own if you just want to understand the electors themselves. Before we get to electors specifically, it's worth clarifying what a cardinal is in the first place, since the title gets used loosely in casual conversation. A cardinal is a senior church official appointed directly by the Pope, forming what's collectively called the College of Cardinals. The word itself comes from the Latin cardo, meaning hinge, the idea being that cardinals function as a kind of hinge point connecting the Pope to the wider church, particularly to dioceses and church institutions scattered across the world. Cardinals are typically already bishops or archbishops leading major dioceses, or they hold senior positions within Vatican administrative departments when they're elevated to the college. The Pope can, in principle, appoint essentially anyone he chooses to the College of Cardinals, though in practice it's overwhelmingly bishops, archbishops, and senior clergy with substantial existing leadership experience. Becoming a cardinal isn't a job with a fixed job description in the way a bishop's role is. It's more like an honor and a formal role within church governance, layered on top of whatever position that person already holds. Traditionally, the College of Cardinals has been divided into 3 ranks: cardinal bishops, cardinal priests, and cardinal deacons. This structure dates back centuries, to a time when these ranks reflected genuinely different roles within the local Church of Rome itself, rather than the largely honorary distinction it's become today. Cardinal bishops were originally tied to 7 ancient dioceses immediately surrounding Rome. Cardinal priests were originally associated with specific historic parish churches within Rome itself, and cardinal deacons were tied to specific charitable institutions within the city. Over many centuries, as the College of Cardinals expanded to include senior clergy from around the entire world rather than just clergy connected to Rome specifically, these 3 ranks became largely symbolic, though the terminology and formal designation still exist today and still show up in official Vatican documentation and protocol. In modern practice, virtually every cardinal is also already an ordained bishop, meaning the old functional distinction between the ranks has mostly dissolved into more of a formal, ceremonial hierarchy rather than a meaningful practical difference in their conclave voting power. Every cardinal-elector, regardless of rank, gets exactly 1 vote. The rule limiting conclave voting to cardinals under age 80 is relatively recent in the Church's long history, formally introduced by Pope Paul VI in 1970, and later confirmed and adjusted slightly by subsequent popes. Before this reform, there was no age limit on conclave voting at all. Any cardinal, regardless of age or health, could participate in the actual voting process. Paul VI's reasoning was largely practical. As medical care extended lifespans and some cardinals remained in office well into advanced age, there was growing concern that requiring elderly, sometimes seriously frail cardinals to participate in the demanding, sequestered, multi-day voting process wasn't reasonable to expect of them, and could genuinely put their health at risk during an already stressful period. The number 80 specifically wasn't derived from any deep theological reasoning. It was simply judged a reasonable practical threshold at the time, balancing continued eligibility for genuinely active senior cardinals against the real physical demands of the sequestered process. It's worth noting this cutoff applies specifically to voting in the conclave itself. Older cardinals retain their title, their voice in church governance more broadly, and their ability to participate in the pre-conclave general congregations we've discussed in earlier videos. They simply can't cast a ballot once the doors of the conclave itself close. The current church law generally sets a maximum of 120 cardinal-electors at any given time. This cap, too, traces back to Paul VI's reforms in the late 1960s and early 1970s, aimed at keeping the College of Cardinals voting body from growing indefinitely as more cardinals were appointed over time. In practice, though, this cap has been exceeded on several occasions in recent decades. Popes have sometimes appointed new cardinals faster than existing cardinal-electors aged out past 80, temporarily pushing the total number of electors above 120 at the moment of appointment. This isn't considered a violation of the rule exactly. It's treated more as a natural, temporary overflow that resolves itself over time as older cardinals cross the age threshold and drop out of elector status. There's no enforcement mechanism that blocks a pope from naming additional cardinals even when the number is already at or above the nominal cap. It's treated as a target ceiling rather than an absolutely rigid, unbreakable limit. Perhaps the most historically significant shift regarding cardinal-electors isn't about age or rank at all. It's about geography, and this has changed dramatically within relatively recent memory. For most of the Church's history, the College of Cardinals was overwhelmingly European, and specifically Italian, in composition. This directly explains the centuries-long pattern of Italian popes we discussed in an earlier video. When the voting body is dominated by cardinals from one region, the eventual outcome tends to reflect that same concentration. Beginning particularly under Pope John Paul II, and accelerating significantly under Pope Francis, the geographic composition of the College of Cardinals shifted substantially toward genuinely global representation. Cardinals from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania make up a considerably larger share of the electorate today than at almost any previous point in church history. Pope Francis, in particular, was noted for deliberately appointing cardinals from countries that had never previously had a cardinal at all, some of them quite small or geographically remote, specifically to ensure the college better reflected the Church's genuinely global membership rather than remaining concentrated in traditionally powerful dioceses. This shift has real practical consequences for how conclaves unfold. A more geographically diverse electorate means cardinals arrive with a wider range of regional priorities, pastoral experiences, and theological emphases shaped by very different local contexts. From rapidly growing Catholic populations in parts of Africa and Asia, to more secularized, shrinking Catholic populations across much of Europe. The 2013 conclave that elected the first pope from the Americas, and the more recent election of the first American-born pope, both reflect this broader, still ongoing shift in who actually sits in that room casting votes. It's worth briefly covering how someone becomes a cardinal in the first place, since it directly determines who eventually becomes an elector. The process is entirely at the discretion of the reigning pope. There's no election, no nomination process open to outside input, and no fixed formula beyond the pope's own judgment about who deserves elevation to the college. Popes typically announce new cardinals during formal ceremonies called consistories, held periodically throughout a pontificate, sometimes multiple times across several years. Popes generally consider a mix of factors: leadership of a significant archdiocese, service in senior Vatican administrative roles, theological reputation, and increasingly in recent decades, an explicit effort toward broader geographic representation, as we just discussed. There's no formal minimum time serving as a bishop before someone can be named a cardinal, though in overwhelming practice, cardinals have typically already served for years, sometimes decades, in senior church leadership before receiving this honor. Because this entire process depends entirely on one pope's individual choices, the composition of the college, and by extension, the pool of future cardinal-electors, can shift meaningfully in both theological outlook and geography from one pontificate to the next, depending on each pope's own priorities when filling vacancies in the college over the course of his reign. So the next time you hear about a new consistory naming fresh cardinals, or see a list of cardinal-electors ahead of a future conclave, you'll understand what you're actually looking at: a body shaped by one individual pope's cumulative choices over years, structured by a set of rules refined mostly within the last 60 years, and increasingly representative of a genuinely global church rather than the historically concentrated, largely European body it used to be. It's a good reminder that even a process as steeped in ancient ritual as a papal conclave is still, underneath all that tradition, shaped by fairly recent, deliberate reforms, and by real human choices about who gets a seat and eventually a vote in that room. If you've enjoyed this series so far, subscribe to Pope Pulse for more, and let me know in the comments. Did you know the age 80 cutoff and the geographic shift in the college were both this recent?